The door shuddered under her fists as rain lashed against her back, her knuckles splitting open against ancient wood, while footsteps echoed somewhere in the darkness behind her, and she knew with absolute certainty that if this door didn't open in the next 30 seconds, she would die in this alley. Blood ran down her temple, mixing with rain and sweat. Brielle Vance had never believed in vampires until 3 hours ago, when she'd walked into the wrong warehouse at the wrong time and seen things that shattered every notion of reality she'd ever held. Now those things were hunting her through the streets of Prague's old quarter, and this massive black door was her last desperate hope. She'd seen the symbol carved into the stone archway above it, recognized it from the research she'd been doing for her thesis on medieval iconography. A crowned serpent wrapped around a chalice. She'd thought it was just another historical marker in a city full of them. But when the men chasing her had faltered at the mouth of this particular alley, when they'd stopped and stared at that symbol with something like fear in their inhuman eyes, she'd understood that this place meant something. The door swung open. Brielle stumbled forward, catching herself against the frame, and looked up into a face that stopped her breath in her throat. The man standing before her was tall, impossibly so, with skin like moonlight and hair that fell in white waves past his shoulders. His eyes were the color of fresh blood, bright and sharp and ancient, and they studied her with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. "Please," she gasped. "Please, they're going to kill me. I saw something I wasn't supposed to see, and they've been chasing me, and I don't know where else to go." And he raised one pale hand, and she fell silent. His fingers were long and elegant, adorned with silver rings that caught the dim light from somewhere inside the building. When he spoke, his voice was like silk draped over steel. "Who hunts you?" "I don't know their names. They were in the warehouse on Mesalova Street. I was just taking photographs for my research, and I saw them." She swallowed hard, her mind still refusing to fully process what she'd witnessed. "I saw them drinking blood from a woman, and when they noticed me, their eyes changed and their teeth Mesalova Street." His expression darkened, something dangerous flickering across his perfect features. "The Naxair clan's territory. You were extraordinarily foolish to venture there after dark?" "I didn't know. I'm just a graduate student. I study art history. I don't know anything about any of this." Her voice broke, and she hated herself for the weakness. But terror had wrung her dry of pride. "Please, just let me hide here for a few hours. I'll leave before dawn, I promise. I won't tell anyone about this place. I just need." A sound echoed from the alley behind her. A scraping, sliding sound like something heavy being dragged across stone. Brielle's blood turned to ice. The man's eyes shifted past her, focusing on something in the darkness. His jaw tightened, and then he moved faster than her eyes could follow. One moment he was standing in the doorway, the next his hand was wrapped around her wrist, and she was being pulled inside. The door slammed shut with a sound like thunder, and she heard the heavy slide of multiple bolts being thrown. "Stay behind me," he commanded. And there was no question in his tone, no room for argument. Brielle pressed herself against the wall of what appeared to be an entrance hall, all dark wood paneling and flickering gaslight that seemed deliberately anachronistic. The man stood before the door with the stillness of a statue, his head tilted slightly as though listening to something she couldn't hear. A knock came. 3 slow, deliberate strikes against the wood. Elasias Penrose. The voice from outside was smooth and mocking. "We know you have our prey. Send her out, and we'll forget this intrusion into your sanctuary." Elasias. So that was his name. Brielle filed it away even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "You forget your place." "Casimir," Elasias said without raising his voice. The words carried nonetheless, projecting through the heavy door as though it were paper. "This is sovereign ground. The laws of sanctuary are absolute and have been since before your grandsire was born. She is mortal and unwelcome. She witnessed a hunt. The laws regarding such breaches are equally absolute. The laws state that any who reach sanctuary may claim its protection. She reached my door. She knocked," I answered. "The matter is concluded." A pause. Then another voice, older and rougher, joined the first. "Your Majesty, be reasonable. The girl is nobody, nothing, a human who stumbled into affairs beyond her understanding. Let us take her, and there need be no incident between our houses." "Your Majesty." The words rang in Brielle's ears. She looked at the man standing before her with fresh understanding and fresh terror. "Not just a vampire, then. A vampire king." "I have given my answer," Elasias said, and now there was an edge to his voice like a blade being drawn from its sheath. "If you remain at my door one moment longer, I will consider it an act of aggression against my sovereignty. And we both know how I respond to aggression." Silence fell. It stretched out for so long that Brielle began to wonder if the vampires outside had left. Then she heard the sound of retreating footsteps, multiple sets, fading into the night. Elasias remained motionless for another full minute before turning to face her. His red eyes swept over her, cataloging every detail with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're injured," he observed. Brielle touched her temple gingerly, her fingers coming away crimson. "I fell running from them, hit my head on something. It's not serious. Nevertheless, you're bleeding in my home. Come." He moved past her down the hall, clearly expecting her to follow. Brielle hesitated only a moment before hurrying after him. She'd thrown herself on the mercy of a vampire king, and apparently he'd decided to grant it. Refusing to follow his instructions now seemed spectacularly stupid. The hallway opened into a room that took her breath away despite everything else happening. It was a library, massive and impossibly beautiful, with shelves stretching up 3 stories to a vaulted ceiling painted with constellations. Books lined every available surface, some so old their spines had cracked and faded to illegibility. The furniture was antique but well maintained, all dark leather and carved wood that spoke of centuries of careful use. Elasias gestured to a chair near an enormous fireplace where flames crackled and danced. "Sit!" She sat. He disappeared through another doorway and returned moments later with what appeared to be a first aid kit, anachronistic in this setting of old-world elegance. He set it on a side table and knelt before her, moving with that same impossible grace. "This will sting," he warned, and then began cleaning the wound on her temple with professional efficiency. Brielle bit back a hiss of pain. Up close, she could see the fine details of his face, the aristocratic bone structure that seemed carved from marble. His hair fell forward as he worked, curtaining them both in white silk. He smelled like winter and old parchment and something darker she couldn't identify. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly. His hands paused for the briefest moment before continuing their work. "The laws of sanctuary are sacred among my kind. Any who reach my door and ask for shelter may claim it, regardless of who pursues them or what crimes they may have committed. I didn't commit any crime." "No," he agreed. "You committed something far more dangerous. You learned the truth about what lives in the shadows of your world. Are you going to kill me?" Now he did stop, his eyes meeting hers with an expression she couldn't quite read. "If I intended to kill you, you would already be dead. The sanctuary laws bind even me. You came to my door in need, and I opened it. For the next 3 days, you are under my protection. Nothing in this city can harm you without answering to me. 3 days, the traditional period of sanctuary. After that, you may choose to leave or petition to remain longer." He finished bandaging her temple and sat back on his heels, still regarding her with that unnerving intensity. "Though I suspect 3 days will be more than sufficient for the Noxeher to lose interest in one mortal witness." Brielle doubted that very much, but she didn't argue. "I don't understand any of this. Vampires are real. You're a king. There are laws and territories," and she pressed her hands to her face, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of everything that had happened. "This morning I was worried about my thesis defense. Now I'm sitting in a vampire's library having my head bandaged by royalty." "The world is larger and stranger than you imagined," Elasias said, rising to his feet with fluid grace. "Most humans live their entire lives without ever glimpsing what moves in the spaces between their neat little boxes of understanding. You are unfortunate enough to have been granted that glimpse." "Unfortunate," she repeated hollowly. "Knowledge of my kind is rarely a gift, miss." He paused, waiting. "Vance. Brielle Vance. Miss Vance, you should rest. You've had a shock and you're injured. I'll have a room prepared for you. I can't stay here for 3 days. I have classes to teach, research to complete, a life. You have a life that will be forfeit the moment you step beyond my protection," Elasias interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "The Noxeher are not known for their mercy or their short memories. If you leave now, they will find you within hours. If you wish to live, you will remain here until the danger has passed." The weight of his words settled over her like a shroud. She thought of her tiny apartment in the new town, her laptop full of research notes, her students who would wonder where she'd gone. Then she thought of the creatures she'd seen in that warehouse, their eyes glowing with hunger, their mouths smeared with blood. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, 3 days." He nodded, satisfied. "I'll have clothes brought for you. There's a bathroom adjoining the guest quarters where you may wash. Are you hungry?" The question caught her off guard. She was, she realized, starving. She hadn't eaten since lunch, and fear had burned through whatever energy she'd had left. "Yes, actually. I'll have food sent up as well. You needn't fear being served anything inappropriate," he added, with what might have been amusement. I maintain mortal provisions for occasions such as this. Does this happen often? Fugitives pounding on your door. More often than you might think. I am known as the arbiter king among my kind. Those who seek justice or mercy often find their way to my threshold. He moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Miss Vance. While you are under my roof, you are free to move about the residence as you wish. However, there are 3 rules you must follow absolutely. First, you must never open the exterior doors for any reason. Second, you must not venture into the lower levels beneath the library. And third, you must be in your chambers with the door locked between midnight and sunrise. Why? Because I rule over other vampires in this city, and not all of them are as bound by the laws of sanctuary as I am. Between midnight and sunrise is when my court convenes, when business is conducted and disputes settled. Some of those who walk my halls in those hours would view your presence as an insult to be corrected with violence. The casual way he spoke of violence made her shiver. I understand. Good. Follow the rules, and you will be safe. Break them, and I cannot guarantee your survival. He inclined his head in a gesture that was almost a bow. Someone will come shortly to show you to your room. Then he was gone, vanishing into the shadows of the hallway with that impossible vampire speed, and Brielle was left alone in the library with only the crackling fire for company. She sat for a long moment, trying to process everything that had happened. This morning, she'd been a perfectly ordinary graduate student, worried about perfectly ordinary things. Now she was a guest or perhaps a prisoner in a vampire king's home, having narrowly escaped death at the hands of creatures she hadn't believed existed. The door opened again, making her jump, but it was only a woman in her 50s wearing a simple black dress. Her skin had the same pale quality as Elasias's, her hair white blonde and pulled back in an elegant knot. Miss Vance? I'm Seraphine. I manage the household. If you'll come with me, I'll show you to your quarters. Brielle stood on shaky legs and followed the woman out of the library and up a grand staircase. The residence palace might be a more accurate word, was even larger than she'd realized. They passed through corridors lined with paintings that looked centuries old, past rooms filled with furniture that belonged in museums. Everything was immaculate, maintained with obvious care and wealth. The guest quarters turned out to be a suite larger than her entire apartment. The bedroom featured a 4-poster bed draped in burgundy silk, antique furniture that gleamed with polish, and windows covered in heavy curtains that blocked out any hint of the outside world. An adjoining bathroom held a clawfoot tub and marble fixtures that managed to look both ancient and pristine. Clothes are in the wardrobe, Seraphine said, gesturing to an ornate cabinet against one wall. They should fit well enough. Food will arrive shortly. If you need anything else, pull the cord by the bed. Thank you, Brielle managed. Seraphine's expression softened slightly. You're safe here, child. His Majesty takes the laws of sanctuary very seriously. Nothing will harm you under this roof. After the woman left, Brielle explored the wardrobe and found it stocked with clothes in her size, everything from casual wear to formal gowns. The casual clothes were modern enough, though of far better quality than anything she owned. The gowns were something else entirely, gorgeous confections of silk and velvet that looked like they belonged in a period drama. She showered, washing away the rain and fear and blood, and changed into simple black pants and a soft gray sweater. The food arrived as promised, brought by another pale-skinned servant, who set a tray on a small table near the windows and departed without a word. Chicken, vegetables, bread, fruit, all of it fresh and beautifully prepared. She ate mechanically, barely tasting it, her mind churning through everything Elasias had told her. 3 days. She had 3 days to figure out what to do next, how to return to her normal life knowing what she now knew. If she could return at all, the exhaustion hit her all at once, adrenaline finally releasing its grip. She collapsed onto the bed, intending to rest for just a moment, and fell immediately into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through gaps in the curtains. She checked her watch and found it was late morning. She'd slept for nearly 12 hours. Brielle rose and dressed, then ventured out into the hallway. The residence was quiet, almost unnaturally so. She made her way back down the grand staircase, following the route Seraphine had taken the night before, until she found herself once again in the library. Elasias was there, seated in one of the leather chairs with a book open in his lap. In the daylight filtering through high windows, he looked even more otherworldly, his white hair gleaming like starlight, his pale skin seeming to glow with its own inner luminescence. He looked up as she entered, those red eyes tracking her movement. Miss Vance, you slept well, I trust. Better than I expected to, given the circumstances. She hesitated in the doorway, unsure of the protocol for approaching a vampire king. I thought vampires couldn't go out in sunlight. a common misconception. Sunlight is uncomfortable for us, weakening, but not immediately fatal. I can tolerate it for short periods if necessary, though I prefer not to. He closed the book and set it aside. You have questions. That much is obvious. Brielle stepped into the room, drawn by curiosity despite her lingering fear. So many questions I don't even know where to start. Then start with the most important one. She thought about that. How many of you are there? How have you stayed hidden? There are approximately 10,000 of us worldwide, Elasias said. We stay hidden because we are outnumbered by mortals several 100,000 to 1, and because we learned centuries ago that exposure leads to persecution and death. We have developed elaborate systems to conceal our existence, to blend into your world while maintaining our own societies in the spaces you don't look. And you're a king. What does that mean, exactly? I rule over the vampires of Prague and the surrounding territories. There are other kings and queens scattered across the globe, each governing their own domains. We maintain order among our kind, enforce the ancient laws, and handle disputes before they can spill over into mortal awareness, the ancient laws. Like the law of sanctuary, among others. Laws governing the hunt, laws protecting mortals from indiscriminate slaughter, laws of succession and territory and blood debt. His expression grew distant. My kind is predatory by nature, but we are not mindless monsters. We have civilization, culture, rules that have been refined over millennia. Brielle moved closer, fascinated despite herself. The scholar in her was screaming with excitement at this unprecedented access to information. How old are you? I was born in 1347. I became a vampire in 1371. I have been king of Prague since 1512. The numbers were staggering. He'd lived through centuries of history, witnessed the rise and fall of empires. That's over 600 years. Time moves differently for my kind. The years blur together after the first century. You learn to focus on the moments that matter and let the rest fade into background noise. He studied her with those unnerving eyes. You're not as frightened as you were last night. I'm terrified, she admitted, but I'm also curious. This is the kind of discovery that would make my entire career if I could ever tell anyone about it. Which I assume I can't. No, the existence of my kind must remain secret. Those mortals who learn the truth are either brought into our confidence through careful vetting, turned into vampires themselves, or, he paused delicately, killed? Yes. So what happens to me after the 3 days are up? That depends on several factors. Whether the Naxeher are still actively hunting you, whether you can be trusted to keep our secrets, whether you have any desire to return to your former life, or if you'd prefer to remain in our world in some capacity. The last option caught her off guard. Remain? As what? There are mortals who serve vampire households, who work as liaisons between our world and yours, who study our history and lore. You're a scholar, Miss Vance. There are libraries in this city that contain texts you couldn't imagine, records going back thousands of years. If you chose to stay, there would be work for you. It was tempting, dangerously so. Everything she'd ever wanted was access to primary sources, to historical records that could reshape understanding of the past. But the price would be abandoning her life, her colleagues, her friends. I need to think about it, she said quietly. Of course, you have time. He rose from his chair, towering over her, and she was reminded once again of how dangerous he was despite his courteous manner. In the meantime, you're free to explore the residence within the boundaries I set last night. The library is at your disposal. Most of the texts are in languages you likely don't read, but there are some in English and other modern tongues. Thank you. He inclined his head and moved toward the door, then paused. Miss Vance? The Naxeher clan is persistent and vengeful. Even after 3 days, they may still seek your death. I want you to understand the full scope of what you're facing. I understand, she said, though she wasn't sure she truly did. After he left, Brielle spent the day exploring the library. It was every scholar's dream, shelf after shelf of rare books and ancient manuscripts. She found texts in Latin, Greek, Old Church Slavonic, languages she could only partially decipher. But there were also more recent works, histories and philosophies written by vampires about vampires. She lost herself in them, taking mental notes, wishing desperately that she could bring a laptop in here and document everything. As afternoon faded toward evening, Seraphine found her and insisted she come eat. Brielle hadn't realized how much time had passed. She followed the woman to a small dining room where another meal had been laid out, this one even more elaborate than breakfast. Does His Majesty always treat his sanctuary guests this well? Brielle asked as she ate. Seraphine smiled slightly. His Majesty takes his responsibilities seriously. While you are under his protection, you are entitled to every courtesy of his household. How long have you worked for him? 143 years. He turned me himself when I was dying of consumption. I've served him ever since." The casual revelation stunned Brielle. This woman who looked to be in her 50s had been alive since the 1880s. "Do you ever regret it? Becoming a vampire?" "Never. He gave me a life I could never have imagined, gave me purpose and time and experiences beyond measure." Seraphine's expression grew fond. "He is a good king, Miss Vance. Stern when he must be, but fundamentally just. You are fortunate that it was his door you found." After dinner, Brielle returned to her room, mindful of Elasias's warning about being locked in her quarters by midnight. She heard the sounds of arrival as the hour approached, voices echoing through the halls, footsteps that moved with inhuman speed and grace. The vampire court convening. She lay in bed listening to the murmur of voices from somewhere below, wondering what business was being conducted, what disputes settled. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her again, and she slept. The pattern repeated for the next 2 days. She would wake late in the morning, spend hours in the library reading and learning, eat the meals Seraphine brought, and retreat to her room before midnight. She saw Elasias occasionally, always in the library, always reading or writing in what appeared to be a journal. They spoke sometimes, careful conversations about history and philosophy, about the differences between mortal and vampire perspectives on time and meaning. She found herself drawn to him in ways she didn't fully understand. He was dangerous, inhuman, a predator who had lived longer than her entire family line, but he was also intelligent, thoughtful, and surprisingly kind in his own austere way. When he looked at her with those blood-red eyes, she felt seen in a way she'd never experienced before, as though he was reading not just her surface thoughts, but the deeper currents of who she was. On the third day, as evening approached, Elasias found her in the library again. "Your sanctuary period ends at sunset," he said without preamble. "I have received word from the Naxeher clan. They are willing to let the matter drop if you swear a blood oath never to speak of what you witnessed. A blood oath? A binding magical contract. If you break it, you will die immediately. It's ironclad insurance of your silence." Brielle set down the book she'd been reading. "And if I refuse? Then they will hunt you the moment you leave my protection. They have patience and resources. Eventually, they will find you. So my choices are swear a magical oath or spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Essentially, yes." She'd been thinking about this for 3 days, weighing her options. What if I stayed? You said there was work for scholars in your world. Something flickered in Elasias's eyes, an emotion too quick to identify. You would give up your mortal life, your career, your friends, everything you've worked for? My career consists of teaching undergraduates who don't care about art history and writing papers that 12 people might read. My friends are mostly colleagues I see at conferences once a year. I have no family left. She stood, facing him directly. Everything I've ever wanted is here, in this library, in the secrets your world contains. If I go back to my life, I'll never stop thinking about what I'm missing. The work would be dangerous at times. You would be a mortal living among vampires, always vulnerable, always dependent on the protection of those stronger than you. I'm already dependent on your protection. At least this way I'd be doing something meaningful with it." Elasias was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her skin warm. Finally, he said, "There is another option. One I hesitate to offer because it is irrevocable and carries its own dangers. What option? I could turn you, make you one of us." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Brielle's heart hammered against her ribs. "Turn me into a vampire. Yes. You would gain our strength, our longevity, our immunity to most forms of harm. You would never again need to fear the Naxeher or any other vampire, because you would be under my direct protection as my progeny. And you would have unlimited time to study, to learn, to explore every corner of the knowledge you crave. But I would have to drink blood, kill people. We do not kill indiscriminately, and we have not needed to kill to feed for centuries. There are blood banks, willing donors, ethical ways to sustain ourselves. The monsters you saw in that warehouse are the exception, not the rule." Brielle's mind raced. Everything he was offering was impossible, fantastical, the stuff of fiction. But she'd learned over the past 3 days that fiction and reality had a much thinner boundary than she'd ever imagined. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked. "Why offer something so significant to a stranger?" Elasias's expression shifted, becoming almost vulnerable for the first time since she'd met him. "Because in 3 days, you have reminded me why I began this work in the first place. Watching you discover the hidden corners of our world, seeing the wonder in your eyes when you find some new piece of knowledge. It has been centuries since I felt that way about learning. You carry a passion I thought I had lost." He stepped closer, and she could feel the cold radiating from him, that inhuman chill that marked him as something other. And because I find myself reluctant to let you walk back into a world where I cannot protect you, the Naxair may accept a blood oath, but there are other dangers you cannot yet imagine. If you remain mortal and stay in our world, you will always be at risk. If you leave and return to your mortal life, I will spend decades wondering if you kept your oath or if they found you despite it. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are brave enough to pound on a stranger's door when death hunts you. I know you are curious enough to spend 3 days reading in a language half foreign to you rather than hiding in your room. I know you ask the questions most mortals are too frightened to voice. His hand lifted, pale fingers brushing the edge of her jaw in a gesture so gentle it made her breath catch. I know that when I look at you, I feel something I have not felt in longer than I care to admit. What do you feel? Interest. Attraction. The desire to know more, to keep you close, to see what you might become given time and opportunity. His thumb traced along her cheekbone. I am offering you immortality, Brielle Vance, but I confess my motives are not entirely altruistic. I want you to stay. I want you here, in my home, in my world. And I am willing to give you eternity to make that possible. Her name in his mouth sounded like poetry. She should be terrified, should be running from this offer, from the enormity of what he was suggesting. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, drawn to him like gravity. How does it work? She whispered. I would drain you to the point of death, then feed you my blood. The transformation takes 3 days. You would sleep through most of it, burning with fever as your body dies and remakes itself. When you wake, you will be vampire, and I will be your sire, bound to you by blood and law. And if I say no? If I choose the blood oath instead? Pain flashed across his face, quickly masked. Then I will respect your choice. You will swear the oath, return to your life, and we will not see each other again. The thought of never seeing him again hurt more than it should. She'd known him for only 3 days, but they'd been 3 days unlike any other in her life. He'd saved her, sheltered her, shared his world with her, and looked at her like she was something precious. I need to think about it, she said, though she already knew what her answer would be. Of course, you have until sunset. That gives you a few more hours. He let his hand fall away from her face, and she immediately missed the contact. Whatever you choose, know that you will leave here safely. I give you my word. He left her alone in the library, and Brielle sank into one of the leather chairs, her mind whirling. Immortality. Vampirism. A complete abandonment of her humanity in exchange for unlimited time and knowledge, and the protection of a king who looked at her like she mattered. She thought about her life in the mortal world. Her tiny apartment, her adjunct teaching position with no benefits and poverty wages, her dissertation that would probably languish in some university database unread. Her parents were dead, her friends scattered across the globe pursuing their own careers. What did she really have to go back to? Here, in this impossible palace hidden in Prague's shadows, she had access to knowledge beyond her wildest dreams. She had the attention of someone who saw her, truly saw her, in a way no one ever had. And yes, she would be giving up her humanity. But what was humanity anyway, except a collection of limitations she'd never chosen? The sun was setting, painting the library in shades of amber and gold, when she finally rose and went in search of Elasias. She found him in a room she hadn't entered before, a study lined with maps and charts that showed Prague both as it was now and as it had been centuries ago. He stood before a window, watching the dying light, his white hair gleaming. I've made my decision, she said from the doorway. He turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. And? Turn me. I want to stay. For a moment, he simply looked at her, and she saw relief and hunger and something deeper flash through his eyes. Then he crossed the room in 3 swift strides and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with an intensity that stole her breath. His mouth was cold against hers, but the passion in the kiss was anything but. She melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and kissed him back with 3 days of pent-up tension and longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. Are you certain? He murmured. Once done, this cannot be undone. I'm certain. Then we begin tonight. He led her to his private chambers, a suite even more opulent than the guest quarters, all dark silk and ancient wood and the faint smell of winter. The bed was enormous, draped in black velvet. He guided her to sit on the edge of it, then knelt before her as he had that first night when he'd bandaged her wounds. It will hurt, he warned. Not the bite itself that I can make pleasurable, but the transformation, the 3 days of burning while your body dies. That will be agony, I understand. And when you wake, you will be bound to me as your sire. You will feel my emotions, sense my presence, know when I am in danger or distress. I will feel the same from you. We will be connected in ways more intimate than mortal marriage." "I understand," she repeated. Though her heart was racing, he cupped her face in both hands, his touch achingly gentle. "I will take care of you through it. I will not leave your side. And when you wake, I will teach you everything you need to know to survive in this world. I trust you." Something in his expression softened at those words. "You should not, but I am grateful nonetheless." He pulled her closer and tilted her head to the side, exposing the line of her throat. She felt his cool breath against her skin, felt the brush of his lips, and then the sharp, sudden pressures of his teeth sinking into her flesh. The pain lasted only a moment before it transformed into something else entirely. Pleasure flooded through her, warm and liquid and overwhelming, better than anything she'd ever felt. She gasped, her fingers digging into his shoulders, and felt his arm tighten around her waist as he drank. The world began to fade, darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision. She felt her heartbeat slowing, felt the cold spreading through her limbs. Just when she thought she might slip away entirely, Elasias pulled back. Blood stained his mouth, shocking crimson against his pale skin. He bit into his own wrist with casual efficiency, and when blood welled up dark and viscous, he pressed it to her lips. "Drink," he commanded. She did. His blood was cold and thick, and tasted of metal and something indefinable, something ancient. It burned going down, a trail of ice through her chest. She swallowed convulsively, once, twice, 3 times, and then he pulled his wrist away. "Sleep now," he said, lowering her onto the bed. "When you wake, you will be reborn." The burning started almost immediately, a fever that ignited in her veins and spread through her entire body. She tried to cry out, but darkness was already pulling her under, dragging her down into depths she couldn't fight. The last thing she felt was Elasias's hand holding hers, cool and steady, anchoring her to something real as the transformation began. The 3 days that followed existed in fragments, broken pieces of consciousness swimming up through an ocean of fire. She was aware of pain, of burning, of her body tearing itself apart and rebuilding cell by cell. She was aware of Elasias's presence, constant and unwavering, his voice reading to her in languages she didn't know, his hand always holding hers. Sometimes she surfaced enough to feel him wiping the sweat from her face, to hear him murmuring reassurances. Other times the pain was so intense she couldn't process anything beyond the need for it to stop. And then, finally, the burning began to fade. Brielle opened her eyes to find herself in Elasias's bed, silk sheets tangled around her body. The room was dark, but she could see perfectly, every detail crisp and clear, as though lit by harsh fluorescent light. She could hear the building settling around her, the whisper of air through ventilation shafts, the distant sound of footsteps floors below. She could smell old paper and wood polish and the lingering scent of Elasias himself. Everything was sharper, brighter, more intense than it had ever been. She sat up slowly, marveling at how easily her body moved, how strong she felt. Her hands looked the same but paler, her skin taking on that moonlight quality she'd seen in every vampire she'd encountered. "Brielle." She turned to find Elasias standing in the doorway, watching her with an expression of profound relief. He crossed the room in an instant, gathering her into his arms, and she felt his presence in a new way now, a connection that thrummed beneath her skin like a second heartbeat. "How do you feel?" he asked against her hair. "Different. Everything is different. I can see in the dark. I can hear things from far away, I feel." She pulled back to look at him, finding her vision swimming with tears that wouldn't fall. "I feel connected to you. I can sense what you're feeling, the sire bond. It will fade somewhat over time, but we will always be aware of each other." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "I was worried. 3 days you burned, and there were moments when I thought I might lose you, but you didn't. No, you're strong, stronger than I anticipated." He smiled, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger, less austere. "Welcome to immortality, Brielle Vance." She laughed, the sound coming out strange and musical. "I'm a vampire. I'm actually a vampire. You are, and you must be starving. The hunger will be intense after the transformation." He was right. Now that she focused on it, she could feel the ache in her throat, the desperate need for something she'd never craved before. Blood. Elasias produced a glass of what looked like red wine, but smelled of copper and salt. "Drink slowly. Your body needs to adjust." She took the glass with shaking hands and sipped carefully. The blood was cold and rich and satisfying in a way she'd never experienced with food. It soothed the ache in her throat, filled the emptiness inside her. She drank until the glass was empty, then set it aside with a shaky laugh. "That was the strangest and best thing I've ever tasted. You'll grow accustomed to it. Come, let me show you what you've become." He led her to a full-length mirror in the corner of his chambers. The woman looking back at her was familiar but changed. Her skin was pale as snow, her dark hair seeming even darker by contrast. But her eyes were what caught her attention, no longer brown but a deep red, the color of garnets. "I'm beautiful," she whispered, shocked. "You were beautiful before. Now you're something more." Elasias stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders, his own reflection equally striking beside hers. "But beauty is the least of what you've gained. You have strength now, speed, senses beyond mortal comprehension. You have time, centuries upon centuries, to learn and grow and become whatever you wish to be." Brielle leaned back against him, feeling the solid reality of his presence through the bond that connected them. "Thank you. For this, for everything. Thank me when you've lived a decade and still have no regrets." But his arms tightened around her, and through the bond she could feel his happiness, his satisfaction at having her here, alive and whole, and his. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of learning and adjustment. Elasias taught her to control her new strength, to move with vampire speed without destroying everything she touched. He taught her to hunt ethically, to take only what she needed from willing donors who visited the residence specifically for that purpose. He taught her the laws of vampire society, the complex web of politics and alliances that governed their world, and he gave her unrestricted access to the libraries, not just his personal collection, but the great archives maintained beneath the city, vaults full of texts going back thousands of years. She lost herself in study, devouring knowledge with the same intensity she'd once devoted to her graduate work, but more than any of that, they grew closer. The sire bond created an intimacy that would have been uncomfortable if it hadn't felt so natural. She could sense his moods, his thoughts sometimes bleeding through into her awareness, and he could sense hers, could tell when she was frustrated or excited or afraid. They spent their nights together, talking for hours about philosophy and history and the nature of immortality. He showed her Prague as she'd never seen it, the hidden corners where vampires gathered, the ancient buildings that held secrets mortals would never know. He introduced her to his court, and though some vampires looked at her with skepticism, a newly turned fledgling in the king's own household, none dared challenge his choice. And slowly, carefully, what had begun as attraction deepened into something more profound. It was perhaps 2 months after her turning when things shifted irrevocably. They were in the library late one evening, Brielle reading a text in medieval Latin, while Elasias worked on correspondence. She looked up to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "What?" she asked, setting the book aside. "I'm trying to remember when I last felt this way," he said quietly. "This sense of contentment, of rightness. And I cannot. It has been centuries since my existence felt like more than obligation and duty." He rose from his chair and crossed to where she sat, kneeling before her as he had so many times now. "You have given me something I did not know I was missing, Brielle." Her breath unnecessary now, but habitual, caught in her throat. "What have I given you?" Purpose beyond mere survival, joy in small moments, the pleasure of sharing knowledge with someone who understands its value. His hand cupped her face, cold and gentle. "You have given me reason to look forward to eternity, rather than simply endure it, Elasias." "I am in love with you," he interrupted, the words falling between them like an oath. "I have been since the moment you pounded on my door with death at your heels and demanded sanctuary. I should have sent you away, should have adhered to the letter of the law and nothing more. But I opened the door because something in your eyes called to me, and I have not regretted that choice for a single moment." Brielle's heart, still and silent in her chest, seemed to beat for just a moment. "I love you too. I think I have since that first night, though I didn't understand it then." He kissed her, and it was different from that first kiss in his study. That had been passion and hunger and desperate need. This was something deeper, a promise and a claiming all at once. She kissed him back, her hands tangling in his white hair, and let herself fall into the sensation of being completely, utterly known by another person. When they finally broke apart, Elasias rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I want you to be mine, Brielle. Not just as my progeny, but as my companion, my partner. In vampire society, that is significant. How significant? It is essentially marriage, but more binding. A vampire king's companion has power and status equal to his own. She would be queen in all but title, and her word would carry the weight of law." He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. "I am offering you everything I have, everything I am, if you will have me." The enormity of what he was proposing took her breath away. Queen. Not in title, but in function. Power beyond anything she'd ever imagined. But more than that, partnership with someone she loved, someone who saw her and valued her and wanted to spend eternity at her side. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll have you. His smile was radiant, transforming his severe features into something almost boyish. He pulled her from the chair and kissed her again, deeper this time, pouring centuries of loneliness and longing into the contact. She responded with equal fervor, her new vampire strength allowing her to match him, to hold him as tightly as he held her. They made love that night in his chambers, learning each other with the intensity of immortals, who had all the time in the world but still felt each moment was precious. His touch was cold fire against her skin, his kisses stealing what breath she had left. And when they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, she felt complete in a way she'd never experienced as a mortal. I pounded on your door begging to hide, she murmured against his chest. And you gave me eternity. You brought light into my darkness, he replied, his fingers tracing patterns on her back. I would give you anything. The announcement of their union sent ripples through Prague's vampire society. Elasias was the arbiter king, ancient and powerful and respected. That he had chosen a fledgling, a newly turned mortal, as his companion was unprecedented. Some celebrated it as romantic, a testament to love transcending convention. Others saw it as weakness, evidence that the king's legendary judgment had finally failed him. The Naxair clan was particularly displeased. They sent an emissary 3 months after Brielle's turning, a cold-faced vampire named Casimir, who had been among those chasing her that first night. Your Majesty, he said, standing in Elas's receiving room with barely concealed contempt, my clan wishes to register a formal complaint regarding your companion. Elasias, seated on a throne-like chair with Brielle at his side, raised an eyebrow. Does it? She witnessed our hunt. She was meant to die or at minimum be bound to silence. Instead you turned her, gave her power and status, made her immune to any retribution. This is a violation of the spirit, if not the letter of our laws. The laws state that I may turn anyone I wish, particularly those under my protection, Elasias said mildly. Miss Vance, Lady Brielle now, I suppose, was under my protection when I made my choice. There is no violation. Your Majesty surely must see how this appears. A mortal stumbles upon our secrets, flees to you for sanctuary, and emerges as your queen. It sets a dangerous precedent. Every mortal who learns of us will now believe they can demand transformation and power. Then perhaps your clan should be more careful about who witnesses your hunts. Brielle interjected, her voice cool. She'd learned much about vampire politics in recent months and knew that showing weakness now would be catastrophic. I was on public land, taking photographs for academic research. Your people were careless. Rather than admit that failing, you seek to blame me for surviving your mistake. Casimir's eyes flashed red with anger. You dare! She dares because she is my companion and has every right to speak, Elasias interrupted, his tone taking on an edge that made even Brielle's spine tingle with instinctive fear. Your clan made errors that night. You hunted messily, you pursued your prey into sovereign territory, and you challenged my authority when I granted sanctuary. If anyone should be answering complaints, it is you. The emissary fell silent, clearly struggling with rage. Finally, he bit out. My clan demands compensation, a blood price for the insult denied. There was no insult, therefore no price is owed. Elasias leaned forward slightly, his red eyes glowing in the dim light. However, I am not unreasonable. Tell your clan leaders that I will overlook their numerous violations of protocol that night in exchange for their acceptance of my companion's status. That is my final offer. Casimir looked like he wanted to argue further, but even he wasn't foolish enough to challenge a vampire king in his own seat of power. He bowed stiffly, turned on his heel, and left without another word. After he was gone, Brielle let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Will they accept your offer? They have no choice. To refuse would be to openly declare hostility toward me, and they are not strong enough to survive that conflict. Elasias took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. But you handled that well. You showed strength without unnecessary aggression. That is the balance of power, knowing when to speak and when to let others overextend themselves. I had a good teacher. Over the following year, Brielle grew into her new role and her new existence. She became a fixture in Elasias's court, advising on matters both political and cultural. Her academic background proved invaluable in navigating the complex historical grievances that often fueled vampire disputes. And her mortal origins gave her a perspective that centuries-old vampires sometimes lacked. She continued her studies in the great libraries, now with the guidance of scholars who had been researching for longer than nations had existed. She wrote papers for vampire audiences, analyses of historical events from the vampire perspective that reshaped understanding of certain periods. Her work was respected, even by those who had initially opposed her elevation, but more than any of that, She built a life with Elasias. They ruled Prague together, settling disputes and maintaining order. They traveled to other vampire courts, forging alliances and navigating the intricate politics of immortal society. And in the quiet moments between obligations, they simply existed together. Two souls who had found something precious and rare. It was perhaps 18 months after her turning when the Naxeher made their final move. Brielle was alone in the archives beneath the city, researching a dispute between two minor vampire houses when she sensed something wrong. The bond with Elasias, usually a steady background presence, suddenly flared with alarm and pain. She moved instantly, vampire speed carrying her through the corridors and up to street level. Her phone rang as she ran Seraphine, her voice tight with fear. "Lady Brielle, you must return immediately. The residence is under attack." "Who?" Brielle demanded, her mind already calculating routes and response times. "The Naxeher. They've brought their full clan, at least 30 vampires. They claim they're here to remove a pretender from the throne." Ice flooded Brielle's veins. This was her fault, the price of her survival and elevation. "Where is Elasias?" "In the Great Hall, holding them off." "But Lady Brielle, there are so many—" Brielle ended the call and ran faster, pushing her supernatural speed to its limits. The residence appeared before her, its doors blown open, scorch marks suggesting fire magic had been used. She could hear sounds of combat from within, crashes and shouts, and the distinctive sound of vampire strength colliding. She burst into the great hall to find chaos. Elasias stood in the center of the room, surrounded by at least 20 Naxeher vampires. His clothes were torn and bloodied, his white hair disheveled, but his eyes blazed with fury, and the bodies of 4 vampires lay motionless on the floor around him. "Brielle, no!" he shouted when he saw her. "Get out! Get to safety!" "Not a chance," she said, moving to stand at his back. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The Naxeher clan leader, a vampire even older than Elasias, with ice-white hair and eyes like frozen blood, laughed coldly. "How touching! The fledgling comes to die with her sire. We can arrange that." "This is a violation of every law we hold sacred," Elasias said, his voice carrying through the hall. "You attack a sovereign king in his own home. You bring violence to neutral ground. You break the peace that has held for centuries. Every other vampire court in Europe will condemn you for this." "Only if anyone lives to tell them," the clan leader replied. "When we're done here, we'll say you died in an accident, your fledgling with you. Tragic, but these things happen, and the Naxeher will assume stewardship of Prague in the absence of leadership." "You think you can kill me?" Elasias's laugh was sharp and dangerous. "I am 600 years old. I have survived wars and plagues and challenges from vampires far stronger than you. I am not so easily removed. Perhaps not. But you're wounded, outnumbered, and distracted by concern for your pet mortal." The clan leader gestured, and the vampires surrounding them pressed closer. "Let's test your legendary prowess, shall we?" They attacked as one, a coordinated assault meant to overwhelm through sheer numbers. Elasias met them with the skill of centuries, his movements precise and lethal. Brielle fought at his back, her newer strength no match for the older vampires individually, but enough to keep them from flanking Elasias. The battle was brutal and fast. Vampires moved with inhuman speed, striking and dodging, using both physical strength and the small magics their kind possessed. Fire bloomed and died, shadows writhed with apparent life, the air itself seemed to thicken with power. Brielle took wounds that would have killed her as a mortal, her vampire healing already working to close the damage. She fought with desperate intensity, protecting Elasias's back, keeping the attackers from surrounding him completely. Through their bond, she could feel his pain, his rage, his determination to keep her safe even as she fought to do the same for him. They were holding their own, but barely. For every Naxeher they put down, 2 more pressed forward. Elasias was flagging, his movements fractionally slower than they'd been at the start. They couldn't keep this up indefinitely. And then reinforcements arrived. The doors to the great hall burst open, and vampires poured in wearing the insignia of Prague's other major houses. Seraphine was with them, having apparently called for aid the moment the attack began. They fell upon the Naxeher from behind, evening the odds instantly. The battle turned in moments. The Naxeher, caught between Elasias and the arriving forces, began to fall rapidly. Some tried to flee, but the doors were blocked. Within minutes, it was over. The Naxeher clan leader lay staked through the heart, truly dead, and the survivors knelt in surrender. Elasias stood in the center of the carnage, breathing hard, his clothes in tatters. Blood stained his white hair crimson. But he was alive, and through the bond, Brielle felt his fierce satisfaction. "You attacked your king," he said to the kneeling vampires, his voice cold as winter. "The penalty for such treason is death. However, I am not without mercy." Those among you who were coerced or misled may plead for clemency. Those who planned and led this attack will face final death." The interrogations took hours. In the end, 3 of the Nakseher leadership were executed, their bodies burned to ash to ensure no return. The rest were exiled from Prague, forbidden to return on pain of death. The clan itself was disbanded, its territories divided among the houses that had come to Elasias's aid. It was nearly dawn before Elasias and Brielle were finally alone in his chambers, tending each other's wounds. The injuries were already healing, but the blood needed to be cleaned away, torn clothes replaced. "You should have run," Elasias said quietly, as Brielle carefully cleaned a gash across his ribs. When Seraphine called, "You should have fled the city, and leave you to face them alone? Never." She met his eyes, her expression fierce. "We're bonded, Elasias. I could feel your pain, your fear. There was no universe in which I was going to run while you fought for your life. You could have died. They could have killed you, and it would have destroyed me. But they didn't. We survived. Together." She finished with his wound and moved to cup his face in her hands. "You've spent 600 years protecting others, maintaining order, sacrificing your own happiness for duty. But you don't have to face everything alone anymore. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." His arms came around her, pulling her close. "I love you," he whispered into her hair, "more than I have words to express. You are the best thing to happen to me in centuries. I love you too, and I'm grateful every day that I had the courage to pound on your door." He pulled back to look at her, a smile playing at his lips. "As am I. Though perhaps next time you could arrange a less dramatic entrance?" She laughed, the sound bright in the darkness. "Where would be the fun in that?" They held each other as the sun rose over Prague, their bond humming with contentment and love. The danger had passed, the threat eliminated, and they had centuries ahead of them, time beyond measure, to build something beautiful together. In the weeks following the attack, things changed in Prague's vampire society. Elasias's willingness to defend Brielle, to risk everything for her, had proven the depth of their bond to even the most skeptical observers. And Brielle's courage in returning to fight at his side rather than fleeing to safety had earned her respect in her own right. The other vampire houses began to approach her directly, seeking her counsel on disputes, valuing her unique perspective. She became more than just the king's companion. She became a power in her own right, a voice that commanded attention and respect. Elasias, for his part, seemed lighter somehow, less burdened by the weight of centuries. He smiled more, laughed more, took joy in small moments in ways Seraphine swore she'd never seen in all her years of service. They made it official 6 months after the attack. In a ceremony attended by vampire courts from across Europe, Elasias formally declared Brielle his queen, his equal partner in all things. The title came with power and responsibility, but also with recognition of what they'd built together, standing before hundreds of vampires in a hall lit by thousands of candles. Dressed in a gown of midnight silk, Brielle looked at Elasias and remembered the terrified woman who'd pounded on his door, begging for sanctuary. She'd been running from death, desperate and alone. Now she was a queen, powerful and protected, loved beyond measure. She'd found not just safety but purpose, not just survival but a life worth living. And she'd found it all because a vampire king had opened his door to a stranger and asked nothing in return except that she stay. "I love you," she whispered as the ceremony concluded, as the gathered vampires applauded and acknowledged their union. "And I you," Elasias replied, pulling her close for a kiss that sealed their bond before all witnesses, for eternity. Years passed, then decades. Brielle and Elasias ruled Prague together, their partnership becoming legendary among vampire kind. They were known as the Arbiter King and the Scholar Queen. Dispensing justice and wisdom in equal measure, Brielle continued her research, publishing works that reshaped vampire understanding of their own history. She established a new archive, open to both vampires and carefully vetted mortals, creating bridges between worlds. Her former life as a graduate student seemed like a dream, something that had happened to someone else entirely, but she never forgot where she'd come from, never lost sight of the terrified woman who'd run through rain-soaked streets with death at her heels. That memory kept her grounded, kept her compassionate toward those who sought sanctuary at their door, because they did come occasionally. Mortals who'd stumbled onto vampire secrets, vampires fleeing unjust persecution, anyone who needed shelter and had heard of the Arbiter King's legendary mercy. And every time someone pounded on that door in desperation, Brielle remembered, and she made sure they were treated with the same kindness Elasias had shown her. She would greet them personally, offer them safety, tend their wounds if they had any, and she would tell them what Elasias had once told her. "While you are under this roof, you are under my protection. Nothing can harm you here." On the 50th anniversary of the night she'd pounded on Elasias's door, they stood together on the balcony of their residence, looking out over Prague's glittering lights. The city had changed in half a century, but the old quarter remained much the same, a preserved slice of history, where vampires and mortals coexisted without the latter ever knowing. "Do you have regrets?" Elasias asked, his arm around her waist. 50 years of immortality? Of living among vampires, of being bound to me. Is it what you hoped it would be?" Brielle leaned into him, secure in his presence, in the bond that connected them as surely as their love. "It's better than I hoped. When I ran to your door that night, I was running from death. I never imagined I was running toward everything I'd ever wanted. I sheltered a fugitive and asked nothing," he said, repeating the words that had become something of a legend in their circles. "And in return, she gave me everything." "We saved each other," Brielle corrected. "You gave me life and love and purpose. I gave you the same. We're even—" "No!" Elasias said, turning to face her fully. His red eyes, which had once terrified her, now looked at her with such tenderness it made her heart ache. "I got the better end of the bargain by far. You brought light into my darkness, joy into my existence. Every day I wake grateful that you had the courage to pound on my door. Every day I wake grateful that you opened it." They kissed as the stars wheeled overhead. Two immortals who'd found something precious and rare: true partnership, deep love, and the promise of eternity spent together. Below them, Prague slept, unaware of the king and queen, who watched over its nights, who dispensed justice and mercy in equal measure, who proved that even in darkness there could be light. And in the centuries that followed, their story became legend, the tale of a fugitive who became a queen, of a lonely king who found love, of a door that opened at the perfect moment and changed two lives forever. Young vampires heard the story and dreamed of finding their own perfect match. Mortals who learned of vampire society heard it and understood that even among predators there could be honor and love and compassion. But for Brielle and Elasias, it was simply their life, their truth, their love story that had begun with 3 desperate knocks on a door and had blossomed into something that would last as long as they did, forever.